Welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we untangle the complexities of maintenance.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we talk about maintenance, trying to untangle our everyday issues and trying to resolve trying to better understand some of our issues that every day faces. Our technology is back online, working again. Thanks, Ricky. And as I said, my co-host Ricky, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be back and finally back in full swing. Obviously, now we've got technology working for us again and that kind of thing. It's, I suppose, the joys of the 21st century. It's, not perfect, but, we learn and we adapt and we grow. So, Derick, safety-wise, I think let's kick off with something that has occurred earlier this week. We've had a unfortunate fatality within the Worsley alumina site in WA. It's obviously never good. Condolences to the friends, the families, the colleagues that worked with this particular individual. And an interesting statistic out of this, Derick, that you and I have noticed. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, we can. It's been interesting that all bar one of our discussions on the podcast where we discussed industry fatalities have all been contractors. Yeah, working as a contractor in industry, both of us. It's disheartening to see that it's always a contractor, and I really feel that it's a contractor's life is not worth less than an employee. And therefore, we need to make sure that we also look after our contractors and ensure that they have the right systems in place to protect them as well. So it is sad. Again, my condolences as well to the family, colleagues, friends, to this individual. And yeah, never always a sad day when something like this happens.
Yeah, I think, Derick, what we should do is probably dedicate a technical section on this, on how to, from a contractor's point of view, how that engagement could be better. So we'll note that one down and we'll bring that back to everyone at a later date.
So Ricky, I think by now everybody knows that you are a motorsport fanatic, putting it politely. You were at the Bend Raceway in South Australia recently, and you had an interesting observation from a safety perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So took my wife to the Bend to watch some racing on the weekend. Great way to spend our 10th wedding anniversary. Beautiful place to go and watch some car racing. If you ever get a chance to go to the Bend and watch some racing, absolutely highly recommend it. Great facilities. But the observation I made, so I've got some news coming. That news will come to light very, very soon. So stay tuned for that, which is the reason I was there. But a crazy observation I made is full credit to the Australian Invitational race cars. So while those guys were racing, one of the drivers unfortunately lost the rear of the car and backed it into the wall. That unfortunately caused fuel to come out of the fuel lines, and the rear of the car itself caught fire. The really cool thing was within 20 minutes, the car was back in the garages. The team from IRC had already jumped in, that identified very quickly what the root cause of the problem itself was, and handed out a temporary fix to all the other competitors for that weekend, noting full well that they've already started to design what the actual proper final solution will be. So I think that's full credit to them, and I think it's also something that I suppose the industry as a whole can take note of is sometimes we can get lost in why, 5 whys, or going too far in terms of investigations, when 9 times out of 10, it's usually just a simple fix. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that to light, and obviously kudos to those guys at the Australian Invitational Race Cars. So
I also think, Ricky, in that situation, it would have been easy just to blame the driver and not actually solve the problem. Which I think often happens in industry, and I think sometimes that's a good example of where we need to stop and think and just don't just blame the operator, but have a real look a realistic look at, how could you prevent, yes, the incident happened, but how can we prevent it from causing so much additional damage?
So, Derick, we still have a discussion with a lot of people that we know within the industry about key performance indicators within business. Now, surely they're actually used just as a big stick to make sure people are doing the right thing, right?
Ricky, yes, sometimes if you talk to people, it seems like that. And I think it's it's actually, the KPIs have got two purposes, and that's the fundamental. So you either drive a specific outcome, or you driving a behavior. So you're trying to get people to behave in a certain way, or you're trying to achieve a specific outcome. And I think it's often misunderstood that, those are the two fundamentals that ultimately give you the result. Ricky, when we start implementing KPIs, do we just go, well, I don't like people behaving this way, I'll go and measure that, or I want people to behave this way, I want to measure that, or I want this outcome, I'll measure that? Or what do you think is the best approach?
Through the experience and the time that I've spent, it should always be driven by process. So by having that clear process, but also having that long-term understanding about where the business needs to be, not just in the short term, so 12 months, 2 years, but in the long term as well. 10 years is, usually kind of the window. So it's about making sure, document your process is documented, and then from there you sit down as leadership group, but also understand how does even potential reporting advantages can help those people on the floor as well. Your trades right through to, middle management, senior management, your planners, your engineers, all that kind of thing.
Yep, and I think the key there is to really understand your process, because I think often in both of our experiences where we've went to implement KPIs, we end up, you're trying to map the process and you realize everybody's got a different opinion or a different version of the process and in the same roles, but they do it differently. And I think that's where the key is to first map it and really, really understand what is the fundamental principles and how you operate, and then you start measuring. There's real examples of that we can discuss, but I think that's the fundamental. Now, Ricky, once you've got your KPIs, right? And like you said, you've got a 10-year goal, and so you've set your KPIs for year one. Do you just carry that from year one to year 10, or how do you go about it?
It all comes back to that plan, do, check, act piece, Derick. Very common in industry. You always want to check to make sure, does that KPI still align to your long-term vision? Is the KPI regularly being hit, and is the behaviour of the people actually for the intended long-term goal of the business itself? So I think there's always that review that needs to happen. If the KPI is still relevant, then yes, you carry it over. But if it's not relevant in terms of the behaviours have been changed, then no, you don't bring that through. So, Derick, what are potentially some of those examples of those KPIs that you would not carry on?
So, Ricky, the one of the ones that comes to mind is in what I've seen in industries. For one of the companies I work for, we introduced measuring near misses, and it was basically everybody has to report 4 near misses a month, so 1 a week. And that was purely a statistic, a numbers game. So you had to put in 4 near misses. That KPI, once everybody achieved that and more, that behavior was established, and in year 2 that was changed to the quality of the near misses. So every near miss that was put in was then graded in quality, level 3, 2, 1, and then discussed with the individual to improve the near miss quality. So it was about driving the behavior to become used to noticing near misses and a real near miss, and then or a hazard, near miss or a hazard, and then actually reporting on them, and so that you over time that becomes normal behavior. And once that's established behavior, you'll actually drop that KPI completely, because now it's no longer necessary to measure, because it's already an installed behavior within your organization.
100%.
So, Ricky, I think the one of the ones that are a classic one in the maintenance world that both of us have seen is when we start talking maintenance KPIs, everybody says, "Oh, we should measure schedule compliance. How well do we do our PMs or the weekly plan?" And you implement it, and they say, "Oh, but what's benchmark?" And normally we say, it's around 80%, 70 to 90, give or take, depends on your organization, maturity, etc. Yes, no, we'll make it 80%. And then the guys achieve 30% because they live in a world of breakdown after breakdown. So every week it's a big stick because you must achieve 80%. That's not their reality. And therefore that KPI completely loses its value. And I think that's why it's so important to go back to your process and then what is your reality that you live in, because you can't measure something that's way outside of your comfort zone. Over time you can get there. So therefore you can set a target of, I'll use schedule compliance because everybody understands it, but you'll start with year one, it's a 40% target. Year two will be a 50% target. Year three will be a 60% target. So you'll progressively increase your target while you're addressing some of the other issues as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I've had a recent discussion with one of the clients you and I both deal with about that kind of piece. They're sort of in this position where they're sort of starting fresh again, and rather than going hard, it's let's do gradual improvements over time, rather than going, you must be 80% schedule compliance. But interesting on the schedule compliance, I've seen businesses that are 100% schedule compliance, but there are other metrics that show a different story. What's some of the examples of those, Derick?
Rick, it's one of my favorite. When you walk into an organization and they say, "Oh, but we've got 90% schedule compliance," but we also have scheduled breakers or break-in work or it's unplanned work, whatever you want to call it, which means I've planned for my trades to do certain work and then something happens during the week, a pump failure, and I have to now reallocate labor to go and do that. But they still do get a high schedule compliance, but they also have a high level of break-in work. And then when you start adding the hours, it doesn't match up because you've got more hours of work than what you've got people on site. And that often happens. You just have a look at it and you go, yeah, these two don't match. What typically would happen then is people would take a 5-hour PM, look at it, add 10 minutes on confirmation to it, mark it as completed, but actually write on it said, I didn't have time to do it. Or I just did a quarter of the inspection, which null and voids your PM realistically. And I think that's the key thing, is to really understand that each KPI is linked to another one. And again, it goes back to, if you understand your process, if you've mapped out your process, this will be very, very clear and visual.
And I suppose on that process piece, Derick, obviously you will want to get everybody regularly trained on that process.
Yep. I think a good way is, sorry, you go.
No, it's all good.
I think a good way is at least once a year, sit down with your team and review your process. And you have to review your procedure once a year in any case. That's once or twice, once every year or every 2 years, which is a good practice in any case. So it is good to then sit down with your team and actually review and say, is this still the way we work? Yes or no? Or is something changed? Has your procurement process changed that now influences your planning process, how you order spares or whatever? Is there something that's changed, and do we now need to adapt how we work? I think it's really important to do that at least once a year. Again, you also then make sure that no bad habits have crept into your team, that they're doing, taking shortcuts or whatever, to ensure that that's valid.
It's interesting you point out there procurement. So what you're highlighting is as a business, you want to make sure that there is that wider communication. People aren't working in those silos.
100%. And again, so if you really look at it from a business perspective, and you start implementing KPIs, and you really look at, what's my influence of stores on maintenance, procurement on maintenance, contracts on maintenance. We've discussed that Maintenance is more than just fixing stuff. It's all these other influences. Even HR has an influence on maintenance, because how many vacancies are you carrying? How many, how long does it take to recruit people? How long does it take to get people trained up to the correct level? There's a whole raft of things that you can actually start looking at when you really unpack your maintenance. It's more than maintenance, it's actually your business. You unpack your business and then decide what am I measuring, because where am I suffering? Where do I want to improve?
I think we won't dive down too far in that. I think that actually deserves its whole own technical discussion.
100%.
So
100%.
awesome. Thanks for your time again today, Derick. Just to summarise, KPIs are not about a big stick. They're there to drive a certain behaviour or a specific outcome.
100%.
They're also there to ensure that business follows process, and if something happens along the line, change your process, but also do that annual or bi-yearly review to make sure your process is current. And also check out the business as a wider perspective. Don't just look at what your team does.
Agree. Ricky, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it. I'm glad we could get back together online and technology kept up. So what are we untangling next week?
I think, Derick, let's continue to explore this road, but let's look at the business as a whole. Let's look at how each department can actually influence the other, and again that talks about our process between the different departments.
100%. Sounds good. Okay, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. And let's keep untangling maintenance, and we'll have a good chat next week.